Hi, I'm Jessica. I was standing in the conference room of Romano's Italian Kitchen, the restaurant my grandfather built from nothing 60 years ago, when my Uncle David looked me dead in the eye and told me I was no longer welcome in the family business. He said I didn't have what it takes to carry on the Romano legacy. Then he revealed the real reason. They needed me gone before the expansion vote, before I could interfere with their plans to sell our heritage to the highest bidder. No respect, no consideration for my 15 years of dedication, just a cold dismissal and a check for what they called my fair share of nothing. But what they didn't know was that while they were busy scheming behind closed doors, I had been quietly securing something they thought they controlled. Something that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I remember the exact moment everything started to unravel. It was a Thursday evening in October, and I had just finished reviewing the quarterly reports in my small office above the restaurant. The numbers were good, really good. We'd had our best summer in 5 years, and the fall season was looking promising. I could hear the dinner rush below, the familiar sounds of clinking plates and satisfied customers that had been the soundtrack of my life since I was old enough to bus tables. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Maria, who worked as our head server. "Emergency family meeting tonight, 8 p.m. Don't be late." No context, no explanation, just the kind of cryptic message that usually meant trouble in the Romano family. I saved my work, straightened my burgundy blouse, and headed downstairs to see what crisis needed my attention this time. The restaurant was bustling with its usual Thursday night crowd. Families celebrating small milestones, couples on date nights, regulars who came in every week for my grandmother's famous lasagna recipe. I walked through the dining room, checking on tables, making sure everything was running smoothly. This was my world, had been since I was 12 years old, washing dishes after school and learning the business from the ground up. Mrs. Patterson, one of our longtime customers, waved me over to her table. "Jessica, dear, the ossobuco is absolutely perfect tonight. You tell Chef Marco I said so." I smiled, genuinely pleased. These were the moments that made all the long hours worth it. The connection with customers. The pride in serving food that brought people together. The knowledge that I was part of something bigger than myself. The kitchen was in its usual controlled chaos. Steam rose from the pasta station, servers weaved between prep cooks, and the dinner tickets kept printing in steady succession. Chef Marco, a mountain of a man with gentle eyes and flour-dusted hands, looked up from plating a risotto. "Jessica, your grandmother's sauce recipe is perfection tonight. The customers, they can't get enough." I thanked him and continued my rounds, but something felt different. There were hushed conversations that stopped when I approached. Servers who normally joked with me seemed distracted, almost nervous. My cousin Tony, who managed our wine program, barely acknowledged me when I asked about the new Chianti we'd started serving. The atmosphere felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. At 5 minutes before 8, I climbed the narrow staircase to the private dining room we used for family meetings. The Romano family had gathered here for decades to discuss everything from menu changes to major business decisions. The room held so many memories: birthday celebrations, holiday planning sessions, and the serious conversations that shaped our restaurant's future. I was the first to arrive, which wasn't unusual. Punctuality was something my grandfather had drilled into me from an early age. "In business, Jessica," he used to say in his thick Italian accent, "time is respect. You show up late, you show no respect." I sat in my usual chair, the one that gave me a view of both the entrance and the framed photos of our family's history that lined the walls. The photos told the story of Romano's Italian kitchen, my great-grandfather Antonio standing proudly outside the original location in 1963. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. My grandmother Sophia, in her wedding dress, holding the keys to the restaurant she and my grandfather had saved for 3 years to buy. My father as a young man, learning to make pasta from his mother. 3 generations of Romanos who had poured their hearts into this place. Uncle David entered first, his silver hair perfectly styled, wearing the expensive suit he always wore to important meetings. He'd been the family's unofficial business manager for the past decade, handling contracts and negotiations while the rest of us focused on operations. Behind him came my Aunt Linda, David's wife, who had never worked in the restaurant but somehow always had opinions about how it should be run. My cousin Maria arrived next, looking uncomfortable in a way that immediately put me on edge. We'd grown up together, started working here the same summer, and had always been close. Tonight, she wouldn't meet my eyes. Then came my Uncle Frank, David's older brother, who managed our supplier relationships and had always been the family mediator. My parents were traveling in Italy, researching regional recipes for our fall menu update. They'd been planning this trip for months, and I'd encouraged them to go despite the timing. I thought I could handle whatever family business needed attention. I was wrong. The last to arrive was someone I wasn't expecting. Robert Sterling, a lawyer I'd never met but who carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from handling serious money. He wore a tailored navy suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked more expensive than most people's cars. David had invited outside counsel without telling me, which meant this meeting was about something significant. "Thank you all for coming," David began, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I know this timing isn't ideal with Michael and Rose traveling, but we have some urgent matters to discuss about the future of Romano's." He gestured toward Sterling. "I've asked Robert to join us because we need legal guidance on some important decisions." I felt the first flutter of unease. In 15 years of family meetings, we'd never needed a lawyer present. We were a restaurant, not a corporation. We solved problems with conversation, compromise, and my grandmother's rule that no one left the table angry. "What kind of decisions?" I asked, my voice steady despite my growing concern. David exchanged glances with Sterling before continuing. "We've received an offer to purchase the restaurant. A very generous offer from Meridian Restaurant Group. They want to expand their presence in the downtown area, and they see Romano's as the perfect anchor for their development plans." The words hit me like ice water. Sell the restaurant. After 60 years, after everything our family had built, they wanted to sell to a chain. I looked around the table, searching for support, for someone else who understood what this meant. "Sell Romano's?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Are you serious? This place is our family's legacy. It's not just a business, it's our history." Aunt Linda leaned forward, her voice taking on the patronizing tone she used when she thought she was being reasonable. "Jessica, dear, you have to understand. The restaurant business is changing. These big groups have resources we simply don't have. They can modernize, expand, really take Romano's to the next level." "To the next level?" I stood up, unable to remain seated. "We're not some failing business looking for a buyout. We had our best quarter in 5 years. Our customers are loyal, our staff is dedicated, and our reputation is spotless. Why would we sell now?" Sterling cleared his throat, consulting his notes. "The offer is quite substantial. Meridian is prepared to pay $4.2 million for the business, including recipes, brand rights, and a long-term lease arrangement for the building." $4.2 million. The number was staggering. More money than I'd ever imagined the restaurant was worth. But the way Sterling mentioned the lease arrangement made my stomach twist. They were planning to sell everything, including our connection to this location. "A lease arrangement?" I asked. "What does that mean exactly?" David answered before Sterling could respond. "It means Meridian would take over operations immediately, but they'd need to lease the building from the property owner. It's a standard arrangement in these kinds of acquisitions." Something about his tone struck me as odd, too casual, too prepared, like he'd rehearsed this explanation. I filed that observation away for later consideration. "And what about the staff?" I asked. "Chef Marco has been with us for 12 years. Maria, Tony, most of our servers have been here for years. Do they just get thrown out when some corporate chain takes over?" "Meridian has assured us they'll evaluate all current employees for potential retention," Sterling said smoothly. "Of course, there would be some restructuring as they integrate Romano's into their operational framework." Restructuring. Corporate speak for firing people who didn't fit their model. People who were like family to me, who had dedicated years of their lives to making Romano successful. "This is insane," I said, my voice rising. "We're talking about destroying everything Grandpa and Grandma built. For what? Money? We're not hurting financially. We don't need to sell." Uncle Frank spoke for the first time since arriving. "Jessica, I understand your emotional attachment to this place. We all feel it, but we have to be practical. The restaurant industry is brutal. One bad year, one health crisis, one economic downturn, and we could lose everything. So instead of fighting through challenges like our family always has, we just give up? We sell out to the first corporation that waves a big check at us?" David's expression hardened. "It's not giving up, Jessica. It's being smart. This offer won't be available forever. Meridian is expanding aggressively, and if we don't take this opportunity, they'll find another location and we'll have missed our chance." The room fell silent for a moment. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my response. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, family members who had taught me about business, about dedication, about the importance of the Romano name. Now they were sitting here calmly discussing selling it all away. "I need to understand something," I said finally. "How long has this been in discussion? When did Meridian first approach us?" Another exchange of glances around the table. Maria finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "About 3 months ago. They came to David initially, and he's been negotiating with them since then. 3 months. While I'd been focused on improving operations, planning for the fall season, working 16-hour days to make sure everything ran perfectly, they'd been secretly negotiating to sell the restaurant out from under me." 3 months, I repeated. "And no one thought to include me in these discussions? I've been managing day-to-day operations for the past 5 years. I know this business better than anyone in this room." "Which is exactly why we need to have this conversation now," David said. "Jessica, your dedication to Romano's is admirable, but you're too emotionally invested to make objective business decisions. You can't see the forest for the trees." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. I was being dismissed, my expertise questioned, my judgment called into doubt, by family members who spent more time in their suburban offices than they did in the restaurant. "Too emotionally invested?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I've increased our profit margins by 18% in the past 2 years. I've streamlined operations, improved our supply chain relationships, and maintained staff retention rates that are unheard of in this industry." "But I'm too emotional?" Sterling interjected smoothly. "Ms. Romano, no one is questioning your operational skills. But major strategic decisions require a broader perspective. Sometimes the people closest to a situation aren't the best positioned to evaluate change." I stared at him, this stranger who had never worked a day in a restaurant, who had never dealt with a kitchen crisis or a difficult customer, who had never stayed up all night balancing books or worrying about making payroll. He was telling me I lacked perspective. "What I lack perspective on," I said, my voice steady now, "is how a family business becomes something you sell to the highest bidder. How 60 years of building relationships and reputation becomes just another asset to liquidate." "Jessica," Aunt Linda said, her voice taking on a motherly tone that I found infuriating, "you're young. You don't understand how quickly things can change in business. Your Uncle David has been handling our finances for years. He knows what's best for the family." Young? At 32, after 15 years in the business, after managing every aspect of operations, I was being dismissed as too young to understand, the same way they'd dismissed my ideas for expanding our catering services 2 years ago, the same way they'd ignored my suggestions for updating our marketing approach. "If this is such a great opportunity," I said, "why the secrecy? Why not include me in the negotiations from the beginning? Why not let me review the offer and provide input?" David's jaw tightened. "Because we knew you'd react exactly like this, emotionally, without considering the practical benefits." "The practical benefits," I repeated. "You mean the money." "I mean the security," David shot back. "The guarantee that our family won't lose everything we've worked for. The peace of mind that comes from having a stable, substantial return on 60 years of investment." The word investment hung in the air like smoke. That's what Romano's had become to him. Not a legacy, not a family tradition, not a source of pride and community connection. Just an investment to be optimized and eventually liquidated. I looked around the table one more time, hoping to find an ally, someone who understood what we were about to throw away. Maria was staring at her hands. Uncle Frank was studying the contracts Sterling had placed in front of him. Aunt Linda was nodding along with David's arguments. "So this is it," I said. "You've already decided. This meeting isn't about getting my input or reaching a family consensus. You're just informing me of what you've already agreed to do." Sterling cleared his throat. "Actually, Ms. Romano, there is one complication we need to address. The sale requires unanimous family approval according to your partnership agreement. Your signature is required to complete the transaction." I felt a spark of hope. If they needed my approval, I had leverage. I could stop this, force them to reconsider, maybe find a compromise that preserved what mattered most about Romano's. "Well then," I said, sitting back down, "I guess you need to convince me. Show me exactly what Meridian is offering and how it benefits our family long term." David's expression shifted, becoming more calculating. "Jessica, I understand your concerns, but you need to understand something too. This business isn't just about you, it's about all of us. Your parents, your cousins, everyone who depends on Romano's success." "Exactly," I said, "which is why we should be careful about making decisions that affect everyone's future." "Which is why," David continued, his voice taking on an edge, "we can't let personal feelings override good business sense. The offer from Meridian is time-sensitive. They need an answer by the end of the month. 2 weeks. They were giving me 2 weeks to agree to sell the restaurant my grandfather had built with his own hands. The place where I'd learned to work, learned to lead, learned to care about something bigger than myself. "And if I don't agree?" I asked. The question hung in the air for a long moment. I could see David and Sterling exchange another glance, this one more meaningful than the others. "Then we'll have to explore other options," David said finally. "What other options?" Sterling opened his briefcase and withdrew a second folder. "Ms. Romano, I've been asked to prepare some additional documentation. Alternative approaches to the situation." He slid papers across the table to me. The letterhead read, "Notice of Partnership Dissolution," and "Petition for Business Evaluation and Forced Sale." I scanned the legal language, my heart sinking with each paragraph. They were threatening to dissolve our family partnership, force a court-ordered evaluation of the business, and compel a sale, even without my consent. "You're threatening to sue me," I said, my voice barely controlled. "We're protecting the family's interests," David replied. "Sometimes that requires difficult decisions." I stood up again, the papers crumpling in my hands. "Protecting the family's interests by destroying the family business. Do you hear yourself?" "Jessica, please sit down," Uncle Frank said gently. "Let's discuss this calmly." "Calmly?" I turned to face him. "Uncle Frank, you taught me how to negotiate with suppliers. You showed me how to build relationships with vendors. You said Romano's was about family, about treating people right. Now you're sitting here while your brother threatens to sue me for trying to preserve what you helped build." Frank's face reddened, but he didn't respond. He just looked down at the contract in front of him. "This isn't about money," I continued, my voice rising. "This is about control. You want me out of the way so you can make decisions without having to justify them to someone who actually understands this business." "That's enough," David said sharply. "You're being dramatic and unreasonable. This is a business decision, not a personal attack." "Everything about this is personal," I shot back. "This restaurant is personal. Our family's reputation is personal. The relationships we've built with customers and staff are personal. You can't separate business from personal when you're dealing with something that means everything to the people involved." Sterling cleared his throat again. "Ms. Romano, I understand this is emotional, but we need to focus on the practical realities. The partnership dissolution process can be lengthy and expensive. It would be much better for everyone if we could reach an agreement tonight." The threat was clear. Agree to sell or face a legal battle that would drain resources and divide the family even further. They had me cornered, or at least they thought they did. "I need time to think," I said finally. "This is too important to decide tonight." "Time is exactly what we don't have. David replied. Meridian won't wait forever. Every day we delay is a day closer to losing this opportunity. Then maybe we should lose it, I said. Maybe some opportunities aren't worth taking. The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of disappointment, frustration, and something that felt like betrayal pressing down on me. These people had been my partners, my mentors, my family. Now they were treating me like an obstacle to overcome. Jessica, Maria said quietly, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. Maybe Uncle David is right. Maybe this is our chance to secure our future. Her words cut deeper than anything David or Sterling had said. Maria had been my closest ally in the family business, the one person I thought understood what Romano's meant beyond its financial value. If she was supporting the sale, I was truly alone. Our future, I repeated. What future? Once Meridian takes over, we'll be employees in our own restaurant. If we're lucky enough to keep our jobs at all. But we'll have financial security, Aunt Linda said. We'll have money to invest in other opportunities, to pursue other dreams. This is my dream, I said simply. Romano's is my dream. It always has been. David leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. Jessica, I know this is hard, but you're 32 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. You could do anything with your share of the sale proceeds. Start your own restaurant, travel, go back to school. The world is full of possibilities. The condescension was back, wrapped in concern. I was being told that my life's work was just a phase, something I'd outgrow once I had enough money to pursue real opportunities. I don't want possibilities, I said. I want Romano's. I want to preserve what our family built and make it even better. But you can't do that alone, David said. And you can't force the rest of us to hold on to something that might not survive the next economic downturn. We survived the recession in 2008, I pointed out. We survived the pandemic. We've survived every challenge that's come our way by working together, by adapting, by refusing to give up. And now we have a chance to avoid having to survive the next crisis, Sterling interjected. This offer provides security that no amount of hard work can guarantee. I looked at Sterling, really looked at him for the first time. He was smooth, professional, probably very good at his job. But he was also everything I'd learned to distrust about corporate culture. The belief that every problem could be solved with money, that every relationship could be reduced to a contract, that every dream could be evaluated based on its return on investment. Mr. Sterling, I said, you've been very quiet about the details of this offer. What exactly does Meridian plan to do with Romano's after they buy it? He consulted his notes. They'll maintain the current menu and decor, initially, while conducting a comprehensive evaluation of operational efficiency. Based on their findings, they'll implement improvements designed to increase profitability and scalability. Improvements, I repeated, such as standardized portion sizes, streamlined menu options, automated preparation systems, where possible. The goal is to reduce labor costs while maintaining quality. Everything he described would destroy what made Romano's special. The generous portions that kept customers coming back, the extensive menu that offered something for everyone, the skilled preparation that turned simple ingredients into memorable meals. And what about our staff? I asked. Chef Marco, our servers, our prep cooks. As I mentioned, Meridian will evaluate all current employees. Those who adapt to the new systems will be retained. And those who don't? Sterling shrugged. Standard severance packages. Standard severance packages. For people who had dedicated years of their lives to Romano's, who had become part of our extended family, who had helped build our reputation one customer at a time. This is exactly what I was afraid of, I said. You're not just selling a restaurant, you're selling out the people who made it successful. We're being realistic, David said. Meridian has the resources and expertise to keep Romano's competitive in a changing market. We don't. We don't. I pulled out my phone and opened the financial reports I'd been reviewing earlier. Our profit margins are up 18%. Customer satisfaction ratings are at an all-time high. We're booked solid for the next 3 weekends, and our catering business is expanding. What exactly suggests we're not competitive? David waved dismissively. Short-term numbers don't tell the whole story. The restaurant industry is consolidating. Independent operators are being squeezed out by chains that can offer lower prices and more consistent experiences. More consistent experiences, I said. You mean more generic experiences? More sterile, corporate, forgettable experiences? I mean more profitable experiences, David shot back. This isn't about preserving some romantic notion of family business. It's about making smart financial decisions. The mask was finally coming off. David wasn't concerned about preserving Romano's legacy or protecting our family's interests. He was concerned about maximizing his return on investment before the market shifted. He saw dollar signs where I saw heritage. Smart financial decisions, I said. Like the smart financial decision to exclude me from 3 months of negotiations? Like the smart financial decision to bring in a lawyer to threaten legal action against your own family member? I brought in legal counsel because I knew you'd make this difficult, David said, his voice hardening. I knew you'd let emotions override logic, and I knew you'd try to steamroll me if I didn't go along with your plans, I replied. I just didn't expect you to be so obvious about it. The room fell silent again. I could see the battle lines clearly now. David, Linda, and Sterling on one side, determined to push through the sale regardless of my objections. Frank and Maria somewhere in the middle, uncomfortable with the process but unwilling to oppose it. And me, standing alone, trying to protect something that everyone else seemed eager to discard. Jessica, Uncle Frank said finally, what would it take for you to consider this offer? What would need to change for you to feel comfortable with the sale? It was the first reasonable question anyone had asked all evening. I thought about it carefully before responding. I'd need to see evidence that Meridian actually understands what makes Romano special, I said. Not just the financial performance, but the relationships, the culture, the community connection. I'd need guarantees about staff retention, not just evaluations. I'd need assurances that the quality and character of the food wouldn't be compromised by corporate efficiency measures. Sterling made notes as I spoke. Those are all reasonable requests. I'm sure Meridian would be willing to discuss specific terms. And, I continued, I'd need to be involved in the transition process, not just as a consultant, but as a partner in decisions that affect how Romano's operates under new ownership. David's expression darkened. That's not how acquisitions work, Jessica. Meridian is buying the business precisely so they can run it their way. They're not going to give you veto power over their operational decisions. Then they're not getting my signature, I said simply. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I could see David's jaw tighten, could see Sterling making more notes, could see the family members around the table shifting uncomfortably. Jessica, David said, his voice taking on a warning tone, you're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. I'm making it exactly as difficult as it should be, I replied. Selling a family business should be difficult. It should require careful consideration, unanimous agreement, and absolute certainty that it's the right decision. And if we can't reach unanimous agreement? Sterling asked. I looked directly at him. Then maybe that's your answer. Maybe the fact that the family can't agree means this isn't the right move. David stood up abruptly. That's not how this works. We can't let one person's stubborn attachment to the past prevent the entire family from moving forward. And you can't let one person's financial ambition destroy what the entire family spent 60 years building, I shot back. The confrontation was escalating quickly. I could feel the anger and frustration building on both sides, the careful politeness of the early conversation giving way to raw emotion. Financial ambition? David's voice was rising. I've been managing this family's finances for 10 years. I've seen how thin our margins are, how vulnerable we are to economic shifts. This offer is about protecting our future, not satisfying my ambition. Protecting our future by eliminating it, I said. By turning Romano's into just another link in a corporate chain. By securing our family's financial stability, David replied. By ensuring that we have something to show for 60 years of work. We already have something to show for it, I said. We have Romano's. We have a reputation. We have relationships with customers who trust us. We have staff who believe in what we're doing. That's worth more than any corporate buyout. Aunt Linda spoke up, her voice sharp with frustration. Jessica, you're being incredibly naive. Reputation doesn't pay bills. Relationships don't secure retirement. You're asking us to gamble our financial security on your sentimental attachment to a building. A building. That's what Romanos had become to them. Just a building, just an asset, just something to be evaluated and eventually liquidated. They had completely lost sight of what it represented. If that's all you think this is, I said quietly, then maybe you're right. Maybe we should sell. Maybe people who see Romanos as just a building shouldn't be making decisions about its future. The room fell silent. I could see the impact of my words on the faces around the table. Some looked hurt, others angry, but all of them looked surprised by the finality in my voice. Jessica, Maria said softly, we all love Romanos. We all want what's best for the family. We just disagree about what that means. I turned to face her, my closest ally, my partner in so many late-night shifts and early morning prep sessions. Maria, do you remember when we were 16 and Grandma taught us to make her marinara sauce? She made us promise to never write down the recipe, to only pass it on to someone who would honor it. Maria nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Do you think she would have honored it by selling it to a corporation that would standardize it, modify it, and eventually replace it with something cheaper and more efficient? That's not fair, Maria whispered. None of this is fair, I replied. But that doesn't mean we should stop trying to do what's right. David had been listening to this exchange with growing impatience. Enough of the emotional manipulation, he said. We need to make a decision tonight. Are you going to sign the agreement or not? The ultimatum was clear. No more discussion, no more negotiation, no more consideration of alternatives. Sign or face the legal consequences. I looked at the papers in front of me, the contract that would end Romanos as I knew it, the legal documents that would force a sale even without my consent. Then I looked at the faces around the table, family members who had become strangers, people who had chosen money over meaning. I need to make a phone call, I said finally. Jessica, we don't have time for, David began. I need to make a phone call, I repeated, my voice firm. This is too important to decide without consulting someone. I walked out of the conference room and down the stairs to my office, leaving behind the voices of family members arguing about timelines and legal strategies. In the quiet of my small workspace, surrounded by the financial reports and operational plans I'd been working on just hours earlier, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized years ago but never had reason to use. The call was answered on the second ring. Harrison and Associates, this is Jennifer. I need to speak with Mr. Harrison, I said. Tell him it's Jessica Romano. Tell him it's about the building. Thomas Harrison had been my grandfather's lawyer for over 40 years, and more importantly, he had been his friend. When Grandpa Antonio died 5 years ago, Mr. Harrison had handled the estate with the kind of careful attention that spoke to decades of trust and mutual respect. He was also the keeper of certain family secrets that apparently not everyone in the Romano family knew about. Jessica, his familiar voice came through the phone, warm but concerned. I was wondering when you might call. I heard there's been some family tension lately. Mr. Harrison, I'm sitting in a family meeting right now where they're demanding I sign papers to sell Romanos to some corporate chain. They're threatening legal action if I don't agree. I need to understand exactly what my rights are in this situation. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Jessica, where are you having this meeting? In the restaurant. In the private dining room upstairs. Another pause, longer this time. And who exactly is present at this meeting? Uncle David, Aunt Linda, Uncle Frank, my cousin Maria, and a lawyer named Robert Sterling from some corporate firm. They've been negotiating with Meridian Restaurant Group for 3 months without telling me. I see. Mr. Harrison's voice had taken on a different quality, more formal, more careful. Jessica, I think you need to understand some things about your family's business arrangement. Things that your grandfather specifically asked me to keep confidential until the right moment. My heart started beating faster. What kind of things? The kind that might change how tonight's meeting ends. Can you talk freely right now? I looked around my small office, making sure the door was closed. Yes, but I don't have much time. They're waiting for me to come back upstairs with an answer. Jessica, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Your grandfather was a much more sophisticated businessman than most people realized. When he bought the original location for Romano's in 1963, he didn't just buy a restaurant space, he bought the entire building. I felt my breath catch. The entire building? 3 stories, including the restaurant space on the ground floor, the office space on the second floor, and the apartment on the 3rd floor where your grandparents lived for the first 10 years they owned the place. When they moved to the house in Little Italy, they kept the building and started renting out the upper floors to other businesses. My mind was racing, but I thought the family just owned the restaurant business. I thought we were leasing the space. That's what your grandfather wanted people to think. He was very private about his real estate investments. He believed that if people knew how much property he owned, they might treat him differently, might think he was getting too big for his britches. People? You mean family? Among others. Your grandfather loved his brothers and his nephews, but he also understood that money can complicate relationships. He kept his property holdings separate from the restaurant business to avoid conflicts. I was trying to process this information while voices from the meeting upstairs grew louder. Mr. Harrison, are you telling me that my grandfather owned the building that Romano's operates in? Owned, Jessica. Past tense. He left the building to you. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down hard in my desk chair, trying to understand what I was hearing. He left it to me? The building at 247 Mulberry Street, including all rental income and property rights, was bequeathed to you in a separate trust that was established 3 years before your grandfather's death. He was very specific about his reasoning. What reasoning? He said that David and Frank were good with money and business negotiations, but they didn't understand the soul of Romano's. He said you were the only one who truly understood what the restaurant meant to the family and the community. He wanted to make sure you always had the power to protect it. I was struggling to breathe. But the will reading, the probate, I don't remember any mention of a building. Because it wasn't part of the general estate. The building was held in a private trust with specific instructions about when and how you were to be informed of your ownership. Your grandfather was very clear that you should only learn about this if the family business was ever threatened by sale or dissolution. And do you think tonight qualifies? Jessica, if your family is threatening legal action to force a sale of Romano's, then yes, I think your grandfather would consider the business threatened. My hands were shaking as I tried to understand the implications. Mr. Harrison, if I own the building, what does that mean for the restaurant? What does it mean for this sale they're trying to push through? It means that Meridian Restaurant Group can buy the business, but they can't operate it without your permission as the property owner. It means that any sale agreement is meaningless without your approval as landlord. It means that you have significantly more power in this situation than your family realizes. I could hear footsteps on the stairs outside my office. Someone was coming to check on me. Mr. Harrison, I need to ask you something directly. If I wanted to stop this sale, if I wanted to keep Romano's in the family, do I have the legal right to do that? Jessica, you don't just have the legal right. You have the only legal right that matters. You own the building. Without your consent, there is no sale. The footsteps stopped outside my door. A knock. Jessica? It was Maria's voice. Uncle David wants to know if you're almost finished with your call. 1 minute, I called back, then lowered my voice. Mr. Harrison? They don't know about the building? Your grandfather was very specific about confidentiality. I was only to inform you if the business was threatened, and only to inform others if you specifically requested it. The trust documents were sealed and filed separately from the general estate. So David has been negotiating this sale without knowing that I own the building they're planning to operate in? That appears to be the case. I felt something shifting inside me, a combination of anger and empowerment that I'd never experienced before. Mr. Harrison, I need those trust documents. I need them tonight. I anticipated that might be the case. I have copies in my office safe. I can be there in 30 minutes. Thank you, I said, my voice steadier than it had been all evening. And Mr. Harrison? Don't tell anyone else about this conversation. I want to handle this my way. Of course. Jessica, your grandfather would be very proud of how you've run Romano's. He always said you had the Romano heart. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a moment, trying to process everything I'd just learned. My grandfather had planned for this moment, had anticipated that someday the family might prioritize money over legacy, and he had given me the power to prevent it. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Jessica, we really need to get back to the meeting. Coming, I called back, but I needed another moment to think. The information about the building changed everything, but I had to be careful about how I used it. David and Sterling were already threatening legal action. If I revealed my ownership now, without proper documentation, they might find ways to challenge it or delay the process. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook where I kept important phone numbers and business contacts. Flipping through the pages, I found what I was looking for. The contact information for Patricia Chen, a commercial real estate attorney I'd met at a Chamber of Commerce event last year. We'd stayed in touch, and she'd mentioned that she specialized in property disputes. I sent her a quick text. Emergency legal consultation needed tonight. Property rights dispute. Can you meet at Romano's restaurant on Mulberry Street in 1 hour? Her response came back almost immediately. On my way. We'll review property records en route. I took a deep breath and headed back upstairs. The voices from the conference room had grown more animated while I was gone. I could hear David's voice rising above the others. Something about time constraints and missed opportunities. When I entered the room, all conversation stopped. David looked at me with barely concealed frustration. Jessica, we've been waiting for 20 minutes. Did you reach whoever you needed to consult? I did, I said calmly, taking my seat, and I have some questions about the sale agreement before I make any decisions. Sterling immediately became more attentive. Of course. What specific concerns do you have? I want to understand the lease arrangement you mentioned earlier. You said Meridian would need to lease the building from the property owner. Who exactly is the property owner? David answered without hesitation. The Castellano family. They've owned the building for decades. My understanding is that they're willing to work with Meridian on a long-term lease that would give them operational security. I kept my expression neutral, despite the surge of satisfaction I felt. David didn't know. After all his financial management and business negotiations, he didn't know that the Castellano family had sold the building to my grandfather 15 years ago. And you've confirmed this with the Castellanos directly? I asked. I've had preliminary discussions with their representative, David said. Once we finalize the sale agreement, Meridian will handle the lease negotiations directly. What's the name of their representative? David looked slightly uncomfortable. I'm not sure of the specific name. The contact came through Meridian's real estate team. I turned to Sterling. And Meridian is confident they can secure a lease agreement? They've conducted preliminary due diligence on the property, Sterling said. Their real estate division is very experienced with these kinds of arrangements. Due diligence, I repeated. What did that involve exactly? Sterling consulted his notes. Property records review, assessment of current market rates, evaluation of the building's condition and suitability for restaurant operations. And what did the property records show? Standard commercial property information. The building has been well maintained, property taxes are current, there are no liens or encumbrances that would prevent leasing. I nodded, filing away the information. If Meridian had conducted proper due diligence, they would have discovered that the building's ownership had changed hands. Either their research was incomplete, or they were keeping that information from David and Sterling. I'm curious about something else, I said. If the sale goes through, and Meridian takes over operations, what happens to our existing lease agreement? Are there any penalties or complications from breaking our current lease? The question caught David off guard. Our lease agreement? Our lease with the property owner. Romano's has been operating in this building for 60 years. Presumably, we have some kind of lease arrangement that would need to be addressed in the sale. David looked at Sterling, who was flipping through his papers with increasing concern. I was told that the lease arrangement would be handled as part of the transition process, Sterling said finally. Handled how? By whom? by Meridian's real estate team in coordination with the property owner's representatives. I leaned forward. Mr. Sterling, are you telling me that you've prepared a sale agreement for a restaurant business without reviewing the existing lease terms? Without understanding what our obligations are to the property owner? Sterling's professional composure was beginning to crack. The lease review was identified as a due diligence item to be completed before closing. But you're asking me to sign an agreement tonight. You're saying the offer is time-sensitive. How can I commit to a sale without knowing whether we're in compliance with our lease obligations? David was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Jessica, these are details that can be worked out during the transition process. The important thing is to secure the sale agreement while Meridian's offer is still on the table. Details? I stood up again. Our lease arrangement is a detail? Our legal obligations to the property owner are details? What happens if we're in violation of our lease terms? What happens if the property owner doesn't approve the transfer to Meridian? That's not going to happen, David said dismissively. The Castellanos have been reasonable landlords for decades. They'll work with Meridian. And if they don't, if they have objections to a corporate chain taking over operations, if they have concerns about how Meridian's changes might affect the building or the neighborhood? Sterling was making notes rapidly. Ms. Romano, these are all valid concerns. Perhaps we should schedule a follow-up meeting once we've had a chance to review the lease documentation more thoroughly. But I thought the offer was time-sensitive, I said. I thought Meridian needed an answer tonight. The offer is time-sensitive, David said firmly. But we can address lease concerns as part of the due diligence process. No, I said firmly. We can't. I'm not signing any agreement until I understand exactly what our obligations are to the property owner, and exactly how those obligations will be affected by the sale. Aunt Linda spoke up for the first time in a while. Jessica, you're overcomplicating this. Lease agreements are standard business arrangements. They can be modified or transferred as needed. Can they? I asked. Do we know what our lease terms say about assignment or transfer? Do we know if the property owner has approval rights over new tenants? Do we know if there are any restrictions on the type of business that can operate in the space? The questions were making everyone in the room uncomfortable because they highlighted how much David and Sterling didn't know about the fundamental legal arrangements that made Romano's operation possible. Jessica, Uncle Frank said gently, you're asking good questions, but we can't let perfect be the enemy of good. Sometimes you have to make decisions with incomplete information. This isn't incomplete information, I said. This is missing information, critical information. Information that could make this entire sale impossible. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Chen. Arrived at restaurant, reviewing property records. Very interesting findings. Ready when you are. I looked at my watch. It had been 45 minutes since I'd left the conference room to make my phone call. Mr. Harrison should be arriving with the trust documents soon. I need to step out again, I said. Jessica, this is getting ridiculous, David said. We've been here for 2 hours. We need to make a decision. We need to make an informed decision, I corrected. And right now, we're not informed enough. I walked out of the conference room and down the stairs, leaving behind another round of frustrated family discussions. In the restaurant's main dining room, I found Patricia Chen sitting at a corner table with her laptop open and several documents spread around her. She looked up as I approached. Jessica, I've been reviewing the property records for this building. We need to talk. I sat down across from her. What did you find? I found that the building ownership is not what your family thinks it is. The Castellano family sold this property to Antonio Romano in 2008. The current owner, according to the trust documents I was able to access, is you. Even though I'd already heard this from Mr. Harrison, seeing it confirmed by an independent source made it feel more real. So I really do own the building? You really do. And more importantly, the trust documents include very specific language about how the property can be used. Your grandfather was very clear that the building should only be used for family-operated businesses that maintain the character and traditions of the neighborhood. I felt my heart skip. What does that mean exactly? It means that even if you wanted to lease the space to Meridian, you might not be legally able to do so. The trust restricts commercial leases to businesses that meet specific criteria related to family ownership and community character. And a corporate chain restaurant wouldn't meet those criteria. not based on the language in the trust documents. Your grandfather was very specific about preventing exactly this type of situation. I heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Mr. Harrison entering the restaurant, carrying a leather briefcase. He approached our table with the measured dignity of someone who had spent decades handling sensitive family matters. "Mr. Harrison," I said, standing to greet him, "thank you for coming so quickly. This is Patricia Chen, the attorney I mentioned." The two lawyers shook hands professionally. "Ms. Chen, I appreciate you taking the time to review this matter on short notice. Mr. Harrison, I've been reviewing the property records and trust documents. This is a very well-crafted arrangement." Mr. Romano clearly anticipated potential conflicts over the business. Mr. Harrison smiled slightly. Antonio was nothing if not thorough. He understood that family businesses face unique challenges as they grow and evolve. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Jessica, these are the complete trust documents, including the original property transfer, the trust establishment paperwork, and your grandfather's letter explaining his reasoning." I took the folder with trembling hands. "There's a letter?" "He wrote it 3 years before he died, when he first established the trust. He wanted to make sure you understood not just what he was giving you, but why he was giving it to you." I opened the folder and found a handwritten letter in my grandfather's careful script. The sight of his familiar handwriting brought tears to my eyes. "My dear Jessica," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means that Romano's is facing a threat that I hoped would never come. It means that some members of our family are prioritizing money over meaning, profit over purpose." I looked up at Mr. Harrison. "Can I read this privately?" "Of course. But Jessica, you should know that your family is probably getting impatient upstairs. You might want to consider how much longer you want to keep them waiting." I thought about David and Sterling sitting in the conference room, probably discussing legal strategies for forcing my cooperation. I thought about the Meridian offer, and the threats of partnership dissolution. I thought about everything I'd learned in the past hour. "Mr. Harrison, Ms. Chen, I need to ask you both something. If I go upstairs right now and tell my family that I own this building, that I have the right to prevent this sale, what are they likely to do?" Mr. Harrison and Patricia exchanged glances. "They'll probably challenge the trust," Patricia said. "They'll claim undue influence, question your grandfather's mental capacity when he created it, maybe argue that the property should have been part of the general estate." "But would they succeed?" "Not if the trust was properly established," Mr. Harrison said, "and I can assure you that it was. Your grandfather was very careful about following all legal requirements." "But the challenge process could take months," Patricia added. "Maybe longer. And it could get very ugly, very expensive." I nodded, understanding the implications. "So I need to be prepared for a fight." "Jessica," Mr. Harrison said gently, "your grandfather anticipated this possibility too. The trust includes provisions for legal expenses if the ownership is challenged. He wanted to make sure you had the resources to defend your rights." "He really thought of everything, didn't he?" "He thought of everything except one thing," Mr. Harrison said. "He hoped it would never be necessary." I looked around the restaurant, at the framed photos of my family's history, at the tables where thousands of customers had shared meals and created memories, at the bar where my grandfather had taught me to calculate profit margins, and my grandmother had taught me to taste wine. "It's necessary," I said finally. "They're trying to sell our family's legacy to a corporation that will strip away everything that makes Romano's special. They're willing to fire our staff, change our recipes, and turn us into another generic chain restaurant. I can't let that happen." Patricia was making notes in her legal pad. "Jessica, if you're going to assert your ownership rights, you need to be prepared for the consequences. Your family relationships will be strained, possibly permanently. There will be legal challenges, media attention, and significant stress. But I'll be able to keep Romano's in the family?" "You'll be able to keep control of how Romano's operates," Mr. Harrison said. "Whether it stays in the Baccialini family depends on how your relatives respond to learning about your ownership." I thought about Maria's uncomfortable silence during the meeting, about Uncle Frank's gentle attempts at mediation, about David's barely concealed threats. Some relationships were already strained beyond repair. "There's something else you should consider," Patricia said. "Once your family knows about your ownership, They might try to force you to sell the building separately from the business. They might argue that you're being unfair by using property ownership to override their business decisions. Can they do that? They can try, but the trust language specifically prohibits selling the building to anyone who wouldn't maintain its current use as a family restaurant. Your grandfather made it very difficult for you to sell, even if you wanted to. I felt a wave of gratitude toward my grandfather that was almost overwhelming. He had understood something that I was only beginning to grasp, that preserving Romano's would require more than just good intentions and hard work. It would require the power to make final decisions, the legal authority to protect what mattered most. I need to go back upstairs, I said finally. But before I do, I want to make sure I understand my options. What exactly can I do with this information? Mr. Harrison leaned forward. You can stop the sale immediately. You can inform Meridian that their lease negotiations are with you, not with the Castellanos. You can establish new terms for how Romano's operates. You can, if you choose, ask family members who don't support your vision to leave the business. And what are the risks? The risks are that you'll be fighting this battle alone, Patricia said. Your family will likely see this as a betrayal, as you using a secret advantage to override their collective decision. Some of them may never forgive you. But Romano's will survive? Romano's will survive, Mr. Harrison confirmed. The question is whether the Romano family will survive. I thought about that distinction as I gathered the trust documents and prepared to return to the conference room. My grandfather had given me the power to save the restaurant, but he couldn't give me the power to save the family relationships that were being damaged by this conflict. Thank you both, I said, standing up. Mr. Harrison, would you be willing to come upstairs with me? I think it would be helpful to have you present when I explain the situation. Of course. That's exactly why I'm here. Patricia closed her laptop. Jessica, I'd like to observe as well, if that's acceptable. I might be able to help address any immediate legal questions. I nodded, grateful for the professional support. Let's go change the course of this conversation. As we climbed the stairs to the conference room, I could hear voices still arguing about timelines and legal strategies. David was insisting that they couldn't let me hold the entire family hostage over sentimental concerns. Sterling was discussing partnership dissolution procedures. I paused outside the door, took a deep breath, and opened the folder to look at my grandfather's letter one more time. The last paragraph caught my attention. Jessica, I am giving you this responsibility because I trust you to do what is right for Romano's, even when it is difficult. I am giving you this power because I believe you will use it wisely, even when others disagree with your decisions. Most importantly, I am giving you this gift because I know you understand that Romano's is more than a business. It is a family legacy, a community cornerstone, and a testament to the American dream. Protect it well. I closed the folder and opened the conference room door. I apologize for the delay, I said, returning to my seat. But I have some information that changes everything about this discussion. David looked up impatiently. Jessica, we've been over this. We need to make a decision tonight. You're right, I said calmly. We do need to make a decision. But before we do, I'd like you to meet Thomas Harrison, our family's attorney, and Patricia Chen, who specializes in commercial real estate law. The two lawyers entered the room and took seats at the table. I could see the immediate tension in David's face as he realized that I hadn't just been making phone calls. I'd been assembling legal counsel. What is this? David asked. This, I said, placing the trust documents on the table, is information about Romano's that apparently not everyone in the family was aware of. Information that significantly affects any potential sale of the restaurant. Sterling leaned forward, his professional instincts activated. What kind of information? I looked around the table at the faces of my family members, people who had been part of my life since childhood, people who were about to learn that everything they thought they knew about Romano's was incomplete. The kind of information that makes this sale impossible, I said. The kind of information that changes who has the power to make decisions about Romano's future. And with that, I opened the folder and began to reveal the truth that my grandfather had hidden for over a decade, the truth that would either save Romano's or destroy what remained of the Romano family. I placed the property deed directly in front of David, watching his face change as he read the official document. The silence in the room was deafening as the words sank in. Property owner: Jessica Marie Romano, trustee of the Antonio Romano Family Trust. Date of transfer: March 15, 2020. Property address: 247 Mulberry Street, including all commercial and residential units. This is impossible, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. The Castellanos own this building. They've been our landlords for 20 years. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat gently. Mr. Romano, the Castellano family sold the property to your father in 2008. The sale was handled discreetly at Antonio's request. He preferred to keep his real estate investments separate from family discussions. Separate from family discussions? David's voice was rising. He bought the building where we operate our business and didn't tell his own sons? He told me to handle the transaction quietly, Mr. Harrison replied. Antonio was concerned that knowledge of the purchase might create unrealistic expectations about the business's profitability or generate pressure to expand too quickly. I watched Uncle Frank's face as he processed this information. He had always been the more level-headed of my father's brothers, the one who tried to see all sides of family disputes. Tom, he said to Mr. Harrison, are you telling us that Dad owned this building for the last 15 years and we've been paying rent to ourselves? Not exactly, Mr. Harrison said. The rental income from the upper floors was kept separate from restaurant operations. Antonio used those funds to maintain the building, pay property taxes, and build a reserve fund for major repairs. The restaurant paid fair market rent for the ground floor space. Sterling was examining the trust documents with growing concern. Mr. Harrison, when was this trust established? Why wasn't it disclosed during the original estate proceedings? The trust was established as a separate legal entity in 2020, 3 years before Mr. Romano's death. It was designed to ensure the building's ownership would support the restaurant's long-term stability. The property was never part of the probate estate because it was already held in trust. David grabbed the documents from Sterling's hands. This doesn't make sense. If Dad owned the building, why didn't he tell us? Why all the secrecy? I had been quiet long enough. Because he knew this would happen, I said, my voice steady despite the emotional turmoil I was feeling. He knew that someday money would become more important than legacy. He knew that someday someone would try to sell Romano's to the highest bidder. Someone? David's eyes flashed with anger. You mean me? You think I'm trying to destroy what Dad built? I think you're trying to profit from what Dad built, I replied. There's a difference. Aunt Linda had been staring at the documents in shock. Jessica, do you understand what this means? You've been sitting here for 2 hours, letting us negotiate and argue and threaten legal action, knowing that you could stop everything with a single phone call? I didn't know, I said. I found out tonight, during my phone call to Mr. Harrison. I had no idea Grandpa had left me the building. But you knew something, Maria said quietly. You knew there was more to the story. I looked at my cousin, hearing the hurt in her voice. I knew that something felt wrong about rushing into this sale. I knew that Grandpa would never have wanted Romano's to become just another corporate chain, restaurant. But I didn't know about the building until an hour ago. Sterling was frantically taking notes. Ms. Romano, this significantly complicates the sale agreement. Meridian's offer was based on the assumption that lease arrangements could be negotiated with the Castellanos. If you're the property owner, we need to completely restructure the deal. Or, I said, looking directly at him, we could cancel the deal entirely. The room erupted in voices. David demanding to know why I was being so stubborn, Linda arguing that I was being unfair to the rest of the family, Frank trying to mediate between competing viewpoints, Sterling insisting that we needed to consider Meridian's position. Through it all, I sat quietly, thinking about my grandfather's letter and his trust in my judgment. He had given me this responsibility because he believed I would use it wisely. The question was, what would wisdom look like in this situation? Stop, I said finally, my voice cutting through the arguments. Everyone just stopped talking for a minute. The room fell silent. I could see the anger, confusion, and hurt on the faces around me. These were people I loved, people who had shaped my understanding of work, family, and responsibility. The fact that we were in conflict didn't change that. I understand that everyone is upset, I said. I understand that this information changes everything we thought we knew about Romano's and about Grandpa's intentions. But we need to focus on what's best for the restaurant and for our family. What's best, David said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, is for you to stop using this secret ownership to override legitimate business decisions. The sale to Meridian is good for everyone. It provides financial security and removes the risks of independent operation. For everyone except the people who actually care about Romano's, I replied. For everyone except the customers who come here because it's not like every other restaurant. For everyone except the staff who take pride in being part of something special. Something special? David stood up, his frustration boiling over. Jessica, it's a restaurant. It's not a shrine to Dad's memory. It's not a museum. It's a business that needs to be run like a business. And I have been running it like a business, I said, standing to face him. A successful business. A profitable business. A business that serves our community and employs good people and maintains the standards that Grandpa established. A business that you're now willing to hold hostage because you have some romantic notion about family legacy, David shot back. A business that Grandpa specifically entrusted to me because he knew I would protect it, I replied. A business that he structured to prevent exactly what you're trying to do right now. Patricia Chen had been quietly observing the family dynamics. If I may, she said, I think it would be helpful to clarify everyone's legal position here. Jessica, as the property owner, you have the right to approve or disapprove any commercial tenant. The trust language specifically requires that any business operating in this building must maintain the character and community focus of the original Romano's restaurant. What does that mean in practical terms? Uncle Frank asked. It means that even if the family wanted to sell the restaurant business to Meridian, they couldn't operate here without Jessica's approval as landlord. And based on the trust language, a corporate chain restaurant would not meet the criteria for approval. Sterling was shaking his head. This is highly irregular. Property ownership shouldn't be used to override legitimate business decisions made by the partnership. The partnership, Mr. Harrison said calmly, was always subject to the terms of the building lease. Those terms have simply become clearer tonight. But this gives Jessica veto power over any business decision, Aunt Linda protested. That's not fair to the rest of the family. It gives Jessica the power to ensure that Romano's remains true to its founding principles, I said. That's exactly what Grandpa intended. David was pacing now, his legal mind working through the implications. Fine. If you want to play hardball, we'll play hardball. The family can dissolve the restaurant partnership and open a new location. We'll take our recipes, our staff, and our customer relationships, and we'll compete directly with you. With what recipes? I asked quietly. Grandma's marinara sauce that was never written down? The osso buco preparation that Chef Marco learned from Grandpa? The dessert recipes that are locked in the kitchen safe? David stopped pacing. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that most of our signature recipes were never formally documented. They were passed down through demonstration and practice. And the ones that were written down are stored in the restaurant's files, which are part of the business I'm not willing to sell. Sterling was looking increasingly concerned. Ms. Romano, are you saying that you would prevent family members from using recipes they helped develop? I'm saying that those recipes are part of Romano's intellectual property. They belong to the restaurant, not to individual family members. If someone wants to leave and start their own restaurant, they're free to do so, but they can't take our proprietary recipes with them. The room fell silent again as everyone processed this information. I could see the realization dawning on their faces that the situation was far more complex than they had initially understood. Jessica, Maria said quietly, are you really going to destroy our family over this? The question hit me harder than any of David's threats or Sterling's legal arguments. I'm not destroying our family, Maria. I'm trying to save what our family built. There's a difference. But you're putting your vision of Romano's ahead of what the majority of the family wants, she replied. How is that different from what you're accusing Uncle David of doing? I looked at her, this cousin who had been like a sister to me, who had worked beside me through countless busy shifts and late-night inventory sessions. Because I'm not trying to get rich off of Grandpa's legacy, I'm trying to preserve it. Preserve it for whom? David asked. For yourself? For some abstract notion of family tradition? Jessica, you're 32 years old. You have no children. What happens to Romanos when you're gone? The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on protecting Romanos from immediate threats that I hadn't considered long-term succession planning. I don't know, I admitted. But I know that selling it to Meridian isn't the answer. At least Meridian offers certainty, David said. They have the resources to keep the restaurant operating indefinitely. They have systems and procedures that don't depend on one person's dedication. They also have no connection to our family's history, no commitment to our community, and no understanding of what makes Romano special, I replied. Sterling cleared his throat. Perhaps we could find a middle ground. What if Meridian agreed to maintain current recipes and staff? What if they committed to preserving the restaurant's character while providing operational support? You mean like they've done with their other acquisitions? I asked. Like Romano's in Boston that now serves frozen pasta and microwaved sauces? Like Romano's in Chicago that laid off half its staff and replaced them with minimum wage workers? Those are different situations, Sterling said. I'm sure Meridian would be willing to make specific commitments about maintaining this location's unique character. Commitments that would last exactly as long as it takes them to realize that maintaining our standards is more expensive than implementing their corporate systems, I replied. Mr. Harrison had been listening to the exchange with growing concern. If I may, he said, I think we're losing sight of the fundamental issue here. Antonio Romano established this trust specifically to prevent the restaurant from being sold to outside interests. He could have structured his estate differently if he wanted to give the family maximum flexibility about the business's future. But he didn't consult us about that decision, David said. He made a unilateral choice that affects all of us. He made a choice about his own property, Mr. Harrison replied. Property that he bought with his own money and maintained with his own resources. He had every right to determine how it should be used. And now Jessica is making unilateral decisions about all of our livelihoods, Linda added. She's using property ownership to override the collective judgment of the family. I felt the weight of their accusations, the responsibility of the power I had inherited. I'm not making unilateral decisions. I'm exercising the rights that Grandpa gave me to protect Romanos from decisions that would destroy it. Destroy it? David's voice was incredulous. Jessica, Meridian is offering to buy the restaurant for $4 million. They're not destroying it. They're making it profitable. They're making it profitable by stripping away everything that makes it worth preserving, I said. By firing experienced staff, by standardizing recipes, by turning it into another generic chain restaurant. And you're making it worthless by refusing to consider any options besides your own narrow vision, David replied. The argument was becoming more heated and personal. I could see that we were moving beyond business disagreements into deeper family conflicts about trust, authority, and respect. I think, Patricia said carefully, that everyone needs to take a step back and consider their options. Jessica, you have the legal right to prevent this sale. But you also need to consider whether exercising that right is worth the cost to your family relationships. And the rest of you, she continued, need to recognize that Jessica's ownership of the building gives her significant power over Romano's future. You can fight that power, but you're unlikely to overcome it. So what do you suggest? Uncle Frank asked. I suggest that you take some time to process this information and consider whether there are creative solutions that address everyone's concerns. Maybe there's a way to preserve Romano's character while providing the financial security that some family members want. Like what? David asked. Like Jessica buying out the other family members' shares in the restaurant business. Like restructuring the partnership to give Jessica operational control while providing others with passive investment returns. Like finding a different buyer who would be more committed to maintaining Romano's traditions. I looked around the table at faces that had become increasingly unfamiliar over the course of the evening. I'm open to discussing alternatives, I said. But I'm not open to selling Romano's to a corporation that will fundamentally change what it is. And I'm not open to being held hostage by property ownership that was kept secret from the family, David replied. If you want to use this building to control Romano's, then you need to buy out the rest of us at fair market value. The gauntlet had been thrown down. David was essentially demanding that I choose between family peace and preserving Romano's. It was exactly the kind of impossible choice that my grandfather had hoped to help me avoid. How much? I asked quietly. How much what? How much would it cost to buy out everyone else's shares in the restaurant business? Sterling was already calculating numbers. Based on the Meridian offer and the current partnership structure, approximately $3 million. $3 million. Far more than I could afford on my restaurant manager's salary, even with the rental income from the building's upper floors. But maybe, with the right financing, with the building as collateral, it might be possible. I'll need time to explore financing options, I said. How much time? David asked. 30 days. That's not acceptable. The Meridian offer expires in 2 weeks. Then let it expire, I said. If this sale is so important to you, you should have included me in the negotiations from the beginning. David stared at me for a long moment. Jessica, you're making the biggest mistake of your life. You're sacrificing financial security and family unity for a romantic fantasy about preserving the past. Maybe, I said, but it's my mistake to make, and it's my responsibility to live with the consequences. The meeting was essentially over. Nothing more could be accomplished tonight. David and Sterling would need to report back to Meridian that the sale was off the table. Uncle Frank and Aunt Linda would need to decide whether they wanted to be bought out or continue as minority partners under my operational control. Maria would need to decide whether she could continue working in a restaurant where I had used property ownership to override family decisions. As people gathered their papers and prepared to leave, I felt both relief and apprehension. I had stopped the sale, but I had also fundamentally changed my relationships with everyone in the room. The question now was whether I could find a way to preserve Romano's without completely destroying the Romano family. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Word had spread through the family network faster than a kitchen fire. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from cousins, aunts, and family friends who had heard fragments of the story and wanted to know what was really happening at Romano's. The first call I returned was to my parents in Italy. They deserved to hear the truth directly from me before the family gossip network reached them with distorted versions of events. Jessica, my mother's voice was strained even through the international connection. Your cousin Tony called this morning. He said there was some kind of family meeting last night about selling the restaurant. He said you and Uncle David had a terrible fight. I took a deep breath. Mom, there's a lot to explain. Are you and Dad both there? I'm here, sweetheart. My father's voice came through the speaker. What's going on? I spent the next hour walking them through everything that had happened. Their shock at learning about the building ownership was profound, but their reaction was completely different from David's. Your grandfather never told us about the trust, my mother said quietly. But it makes perfect sense. He was always worried about what would happen to Romano's if the family ever split apart. He was worried about David specifically, my father added. He loved his brother, but he knew David saw everything in terms of numbers and returns. He used to say that David could calculate the value of a meal but never understood the value of a memory. So you think I did the right thing? I asked. I think you did exactly what your grandfather hoped you would do, my mother replied. He trusted you to protect Romano's because he knew you understood what it really means to our family. The conversation with my parents gave me strength for what I knew would be a difficult day. By the time I arrived at Romano's, a small crowd had gathered outside. Word about the failed sale had leaked to the local business community, and reporters from 2 Italian-American newspapers were waiting to ask questions about the family dispute. I slipped in through the back entrance, hoping to avoid the media attention. The kitchen was already busy with prep work for the lunch service, but I could feel the tension in the air. Staff members were whispering among themselves, clearly aware that something significant had happened. Chef Marco approached me as I hung up my jacket. Jessica, the staff is worried. There are rumors about the restaurant being sold, about family fighting. People are scared about their jobs. I looked around the kitchen at faces I had worked alongside for years. These people had become like family to me, and they deserved to know the truth about their future. "Can you gather everyone in the dining room?" I asked. "I need to address the whole team." 10 minutes later, I stood before the assembled staff of Romano's. Servers, cooks, bartenders, busboys, and dishwashers. People who had dedicated years of their lives to making the restaurant successful. People who deserved better than to learn about their future from gossip and speculation. "I know there have been rumors about changes at Romano's," I began. "I want to tell you directly what's happening and what it means for all of you." I explained about the Meridian offer, about the family meeting, about my decision to reject the sale. I kept the details about the building ownership private, focusing instead on my commitment to preserving Romano's character and protecting their jobs. "Does this mean we're safe?" asked Maria Santos, one of our longtime servers. "Does this mean no corporate changes?" "It means Romano's will continue to operate exactly as it has," I said. "Same recipes, same standards, same commitment to quality. Your jobs are secure." The relief in the room was palpable. Several staff members thanked me for fighting to keep Romano's independent. Chef Marco actually wiped tears from his eyes as he talked about his fear of losing the creative freedom that corporate ownership would have eliminated. The show of support from the staff strengthened my resolve, but I knew the real challenges were just beginning. David had made it clear that he wouldn't accept my decision quietly. By noon, I had received a call from a new lawyer representing the other family members. "Ms. Romano, this is Catherine Walsh from Brennan Walsh and Associates. I'm representing David Romano and the other family members in their dispute with you over the restaurant sale." "What kind of dispute?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "They're filing a lawsuit challenging your grandfather's trust and your claimed ownership of the building. They believe the trust was improperly established and that the property should have been part of the general estate." I had expected this, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the stomach. On what grounds? Undue influence, lack of proper disclosure to other family members, and failure to follow appropriate legal procedures. They're also seeking an injunction to prevent you from interfering with the Meridian sale pending resolution of the ownership dispute. The legal battle I had hoped to avoid was beginning. I immediately called Patricia Chen to discuss defense strategies. "Jessica, this is going to be expensive and time-consuming," she warned. "Are you prepared for a potentially lengthy court fight?" "I'm prepared for whatever it takes to protect Romano's," I replied. "But I need to understand what we're up against. They're essentially arguing that your grandfather's trust was invalid, and that you're using improperly obtained property rights to override legitimate family business decisions. It's not an easy case for them to win, but it's not frivolous either. What are our chances? If the trust was properly established and your grandfather was mentally competent when he created it, we should prevail. But the process could take months, and there's always uncertainty in litigation." While I was dealing with legal challenges, the broader Italian-American community was beginning to take sides in the dispute. The story of a family fighting over whether to sell their traditional restaurant to a corporate chain resonated with many people who had watched neighborhood businesses disappear under development pressure. By evening, I had received calls from 3 other family-owned restaurants offering support and advice. The president of the Italian-American Business Association had issued a statement supporting my decision to preserve Romano's independence. A food blogger with a large local following had written a piece calling me a, quote, "guardian of culinary heritage," but the most important call came from an unexpected source. "Ms. Romano, this is Michael Castellano. I believe you know my family owned your building before your grandfather bought it." I was surprised to hear from him. "Mr. Castellano, yes. I hope there are no hard feelings about the sale." "Quite the opposite. I called to offer my support for what you're doing. My family sold that building to your grandfather because we trusted him to maintain its character and preserve its connection to the neighborhood. We've been watching the gentrification of Little Italy with great concern. I appreciate your support," I said, "but I have to ask, why didn't my Uncle David know about the sale? He seemed to think your family still owned the building." Castellano chuckled. "Because your grandfather asked us to keep the transaction private. He said he didn't want family members to know about his real estate investments because it might change how they viewed the restaurant business. We respected his wishes. And you think he made the right decision? I think recent events prove he made the right decision. Your uncle's willingness to sell to Meridian shows exactly the kind of thinking your grandfather was trying to prevent. The conversation with Castellano reminded me that this dispute was about more than just family dynamics. It was about the future of neighborhood businesses, about the preservation of cultural traditions, about the kind of community we wanted to live in. That evening, I received a surprise visit from Mrs. Patterson, the longtime customer who had complimented our osso buco just days earlier. "Jessica, dear," she said, settling into a chair in my office, "I heard about the troubles you're having with your family. I wanted you to know that my husband and I support what you're doing." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means a lot to me. We've been coming to Romano's for 15 years. We had our anniversary dinner here last month. This place isn't just a restaurant to us, it's part of our lives. The thought of it becoming some corporate chain makes me sick." She leaned forward, her expression serious. "Jessica, I don't know what kind of financial pressure you're under, but if you need help fighting this battle, there are people in the community who would be willing to support you." "Support me how?" "We could organize a customer campaign, raise money for legal expenses, even provide testimony about what Romano's means to the neighborhood. You're not fighting this alone." The offer of community support was overwhelming. I had been so focused on the family conflict that I hadn't fully considered how many other people had a stake in Romano's future. Over the next week, that support became increasingly visible. A petition supporting Romano's independence collected over 500 signatures. The local newspaper published an editorial criticizing corporate takeovers of family businesses. A group of customers organized a Save Romano's dinner night that packed the restaurant beyond capacity. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. I received a call from James Murphy, a commercial banker who specialized in family business financing. "Ms. Romano, I've been following your situation in the news. I think we might be able to help you buy out your family members' shares in the restaurant business." "I'm listening," I said. "Given your ownership of the building and the restaurant's proven profitability, we could structure a loan that would allow you to purchase the other family members' interests. The building would serve as collateral, and the restaurant's cash flow would support the loan payments." The possibility of actually buying out my family members had seemed impossible just days earlier. But Murphy's proposal offered a potential solution that would give me complete control over Romano's future, while providing the other family members with the financial return they wanted. "What kind of terms are we talking about?" I asked. "Based on preliminary numbers, we're looking at approximately $3 million at competitive interest rates. The loan would be structured as a business acquisition with a 15-year amortization schedule." "And you're confident the restaurant's income could support those payments?" "Romano's has consistently generated strong cash flow. With proper management and continued growth, the loan payments would be manageable." I scheduled a meeting with Murphy for the following day, but I knew I needed to approach this opportunity carefully. Taking on $3 million in debt would be a massive responsibility, and failure would mean losing not just Romano's, but also the building my grandfather had left me. That night I sat in the empty restaurant after closing, reading through my grandfather's letter again. His words about protecting Romano's and using the trust wisely took on new meaning as I contemplated the biggest financial decision of my life. The next morning brought news that the legal battle was escalating. David's lawyers had filed for an emergency injunction that would prevent me from making any major operational changes at Romano's pending resolution of the ownership dispute. They were essentially trying to freeze everything in place until they could challenge my authority. Patricia Chen called with an update on our legal strategy. "Jessica, we need to file our response to the injunction request within 48 hours, but I also think we should consider making a settlement offer to the other family members." "What kind of settlement?" "Offer to buy them out at the price suggested by the Meridian deal. If they accept, it ends the litigation and gives you clear control of Romano's. If they reject it, we can argue in court that you made a good faith effort to resolve the dispute fairly. But that requires me to secure the financing first, which is why you need to make a decision about the bank loan quickly. The longer this drags out, the more expensive it becomes, and the more it damages the restaurant's reputation." I spent the morning in meetings with Murphy and his lending team, reviewing financial projections and loan terms. The numbers were intimidating, but the restaurant's track record was strong enough to support the debt service. By afternoon, I had made my decision. I would take the loan, buy out my family members, and assume complete control of Romano's. It was a risk, but it was also the clearest path to preserving what my grandfather had built. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had spent 3 months negotiating with Meridian to sell Romano's for financial security. Now I was about to take on massive debt to prevent that sale. But the difference was that my debt would preserve Romano's independence, while his sale would have eliminated it. I called Patricia to confirm that I wanted to proceed with the buyout offer. "Draft the settlement proposal," I said. "I'm ready to put my money where my principles are." "Jessica, are you sure about this? $3 million is a substantial commitment." "I'm sure. This is what my grandfather would have wanted me to do." "All right, I'll prepare the documentation and send it to the other family member's attorney. But you should be prepared for the possibility that they'll reject the offer and insist on continuing the litigation. Then we'll fight it in court, but at least they'll know I'm serious about finding a fair solution." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. The next few days would determine whether I could actually pull off this buyout, whether my family would accept my offer, and whether Romano's would survive the transition to my sole ownership. The battle for Romano's was entering its final phase, and I was about to discover whether my grandfather's trust in my judgment had been justified. The response to my buyout offer came faster than I expected. Catherine Walsh called at 7 in the morning, just as I was opening the restaurant for prep. "Ms. Romano, my clients have reviewed your settlement proposal. They're prepared to accept your offer of $3 million for their combined shares in the restaurant business." I nearly dropped the phone. "They're accepting?" "With conditions. They want the transaction completed within 30 days, and they want a clause stating that you'll be solely responsible for all future restaurant operations and liabilities. They also want the lawsuit dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can't challenge your building ownership again." "Those terms are acceptable," I said, my heart racing. "When can we finalize the agreement?" "I'll have the paperwork ready by this afternoon. But Ms. Romano, I have to ask, are you certain you can secure the financing for this purchase?" "The loan documents are being prepared as we speak," I replied. "This deal will close." 3 hours later, I was sitting in James Murphy's office, signing loan documents that would fundamentally change my life. $3 million secured by the building my grandfather had left me, with 15 years of monthly payments that would stretch my finances to their limits. "Jessica," Murphy said as I signed the final page, "I want you to understand what you're taking on. This loan will require discipline and consistent performance from the restaurant. There's no room for error." "I understand," I said, "but Romano's has been profitable for 60 years. I intend to keep it that way." "I'm sure you do. But now you'll be doing it without the safety net of family partners. Every decision, every success, every failure will be yours alone." The weight of that responsibility was daunting, but also liberating. No more family meetings where business decisions were held hostage by personal grievances. No more compromises with people who didn't share my vision for Romano's future. The closing took place the following Thursday in a sterile conference room that felt nothing like the warm, familiar space where Romano's had been discussed for decades. David sat across from me, his expression unreadable as he signed documents transferring his shares. Uncle Frank seemed sad but resigned. Aunt Linda avoided eye contact entirely. Maria was the last to sign. As she pushed the papers across the table, she looked directly at me for the first time since the family meeting. "I hope you know what you're doing, Jessica," she said quietly. "I hope so too," I replied. When the transaction was complete, I owned Romano's entirely. The restaurant, the recipes, the customer relationships, the staff, the history, all of it was now my responsibility alone. David stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Jessica, I still think you're making a mistake, but I hope you prove me wrong." "I hope so too, Uncle David." Walking back to Romano's that afternoon, I felt the full weight of what I had accomplished and what I had lost. The restaurant was secure, protected from corporate takeover, free to maintain its character and traditions. But the price had been the fracturing of family relationships that had defined my entire life. The staff noticed the change immediately. Without the tension of family disputes hanging over daily operations, Everyone seemed more relaxed, more focused on their work. Chef Marco approached me during the dinner rush with a smile I hadn't seen in weeks. "Jessica, the kitchen feels different tonight, like we can breathe again." "It should feel different," I said. "We're not fighting for survival anymore, we're building for the future." The first few months of sole ownership were challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every decision required careful consideration of both immediate needs and long-term loan obligations. I implemented new cost controls, renegotiated supplier contracts, and expanded our catering services to boost revenue. But the hardest part was the isolation. For the first time in my career, I had no family partners to consult with, no one who shared the burden of major decisions. Late at night, balancing books and planning menus, I sometimes wondered if David had been right about the weight of responsibility. Those doubts disappeared 6 months later when Romano's received its first James Beard Award nomination for Outstanding Service. The nomination recognized not just our food, but our commitment to hospitality and community connection. It was validation that preserving Romano's character had been worth the fight. The award ceremony was held in Chicago, and I debated whether to attend. The nomination was an honor, but it also meant facing the broader culinary community's scrutiny of our family dispute. I decided to go, wearing my grandmother's pearl necklace for luck. When they called Romano's name as the winner, I walked to the stage thinking about all the people who had made this moment possible. My grandparents, who had built something worth preserving. My staff, who had remained loyal through months of uncertainty. My community, who had supported our independence. In my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of family businesses in preserving culinary traditions and strengthening communities. I didn't mention the legal battles or the personal costs of the past year. Instead, I focused on what we had accomplished together. "This award belongs to everyone who believes that some things are worth preserving," I said. "That excellence and tradition have value beyond what they can generate in profit. That the best restaurants are not just businesses, but gathering places where families create memories and communities come together." The applause was warm and sustained. After the ceremony, several other family business owners approached me to share their own stories of fighting to preserve their traditions against corporate pressure. Flying back to New York, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Romano's was thriving, the staff was happy, and our customer base was stronger than ever. The loan payments were manageable, and the restaurant's reputation had never been better. But the real validation came the next morning when I arrived at Romano's to find my parents waiting in the dining room. They had returned from Italy a day early, unable to wait any longer to see how their daughter was handling her new responsibilities. "We're proud of you," my mother said, embracing me. "Not just for saving Romano's, but for doing it with dignity and grace. Your grandfather would be proud too," my father added. "You've proven that his trust in you was justified." Standing in the restaurant that morning, surrounded by the familiar sounds and smells of the place I loved, I understood something fundamental about legacy. It's not about preserving the past unchanged, but about honoring its values while adapting to new challenges. Romano's was still Romano's, but it was also something new. A restaurant owned and operated by someone who understood that success meant more than profit margins, that excellence required more than efficiency, that true hospitality came from genuine care for people and community. The family relationships damaged by our dispute would heal slowly, if at all. But Romano's would continue to serve as a gathering place for families creating new memories, a testament to the belief that some things are worth preserving, and proof that sometimes the courage to stand alone is the only way to protect what matters most. As I watched Chef Marco teaching a young prep cook the proper technique for our signature marinara sauce, I realized that this was how traditions really survive. Not by being frozen in time, but by being passed on with love and respect to the next generation of caretakers. Romano's had survived its greatest crisis, and I had discovered that the power to preserve something precious was worth any price I had to pay. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.